Welcome to Pops and Pylons. There's a new expansion for EU4 coming out. It's the Leviathan Expansion, and as always with Paradox, the accompanying free patch 1.31. And I'm going to take this whole video to just talk about the patch notes, the changes, and what I think they mean. If that's not your jam, then, come back when I have a gameplay video. This video is just going to be me sitting in front of a list with text notes. And that's it. Now, for those who are staying, let's just jump right in. You will notice, or at least the more observant of you will have noticed, that these are not the patch notes as provided by Paradox. You can find them on this link here in the forums. There's a dev diary on them. But I've taken the liberty to abridge those notes, pick out the points that I actually think are relevant, and to sort them or sort of group them into categories for, easier consumption and easier talking about. Now, we'll start with the features of the paid expansion, and there's going to be a section of 3 features, and then there's going to be a bunch of other changes that are happening with the patch that are not really features that are introduced, but just changes. If you buy Leviathan, you get monuments. Monuments are extremely similar to monuments or wonders in Crusader Kings 3. You can build them in specific provinces according to their actual real-life location, and they give bonuses if built, and then you can upgrade them to multiple levels to get even better bonuses. I believe it costs 1,000 ducats to build the first rank, and then you build on that. So not something you just build for cheap in the early game, although in our current Glenore campaign you certainly would be able to build quite a few of those. So these were added with a bunch of events related to them, and I suppose some illustrations. Sure. It's probably an okay feature. It's kind of interesting in that it makes different provinces different. There's more value to a province now than just the amount of development, the trade good it has, the religion and culture it has, the buildings it has, but it also has this special part where you really, really want that Cologne province to build the cathedral, or to take the cathedral that's already there. I don't know that that's one of the monuments, but one would expect. So that's monuments. Next up, favors. Favors are already in the game. You can go into your EU4 game right now, and in the diplomacy tab, the diplomacy screen, there are 3 tabs, and on the 3rd tab you see the favors you accrue with a nation, essentially only if you're allied. I think it's only if you're allied. And right now favors don't do much. You can spend them to call your allies into wars if you have 10 favors, and you can actually click a button to spend favors to essentially ask them to prepare for war and increase their trust, if I remember correctly. Now things are slightly different. The original favor system does still seem to be there, but you can also spend favors in exchange for ducats, soldiers, and sailors. You can ask them to make somebody break an alliance, and I think that's very nice. Because it happens quite often to me that one of my allies is allied to somebody I want to attack, and then being able to trade some of those favors we accumulated to stop them from helping those people, that seems very, very nice. Now, put a relative on the throne, request return of a core. That's also quite interesting. If you have a friend and they have one of your cores, then this might be an easy way to stay friends while getting your core. And, well, you can use it to reduce the opinion towards another country. Not sure how useful that's going to be. But I'm very happy that you'll be able to use favors in other ways than just what they're used for right now. Because right now, really what happens is favors really matter a lot until you get 10, because you need to be able to call somebody into a war. And it can be hard to have a larger friend, or to call a larger friend into a war, because it's really, really slow to accumulate those favors. But once you have sort of equal friends, then you just have favors and you don't really need them. I'm not going to greatly discuss the fact that this is an expansion feature. It doesn't really scream expansion feature to me, it screams base mechanic. But I guess I have to put some stuff in the paid expansion. colony nations have been changed a bit. And they have 3 different types now, give them different behavior, and they can be upgraded for various bonuses. There's a bit more to that, as we'll see in the free feature changes, but generally there is a tiny bit of extra gameplay to colony nations now. It's not going to be a huge change, but it makes them slightly more interesting than just here's 5 provinces and then go do your own stuff. I've summarized this next section under tall play because it's all about getting your own capital state or generally your stuff bigger rather than taking more land. One of the bigger things here is the concentration of development, where you take development from your vassals and put it into your capital, which can be quite cool depending on how much it costs, because the cost of integrating a vassal is based on their development. So if you steal some of their development first, it's going to be cheaper to integrate them, faster to integrate them, and you still have all the development. And I assume it's going to increase liberty desire, of course, but if you can handle that, then that might be nice. You can centralize states to reduce governing cost at, I don't know what you're paying for it, we'll have to see. You can also steal not only your subjects' development, but you can also steal your enemies' development with the pillage capital war goal. So in the peace deal you can steal their development rather than just taking their provinces outright. And I assume that might not increase aggressive expansion, so it might be a way to quote-unquote expand without actually having to be considered a bad boy, which can be quite good, as you can see in our current campaign. There have been a bunch of changes to North American natives, and part of that is changes to totemism. So there's now a new mechanic, apparently, where previous rulers can be selected as ancestors, and then you get modifiers based on their traits. So if you have a really good previous ruler, then you can select that one as an ancestor, so make them part of your religion, and then you get modifiers for that. It doesn't seem like a huge change, but I think it's a cute difference to the very fixed modifiers that you can get in the other religions, like Protestants, for example. And there are a bunch of events that have been added for it. I have a big header, well, it's not a big header here, but it's going to be recurring in other sections, but quality of life changes. So things that don't really change how the game works, but that make playing the game nicer. There's now a option to automatically carpet siege selected areas. So similar to, I assume, the suppress rebels mechanic, where you select an army and then say, well, place suppress rebels in this whole area. You can now tell your army, please just take all the provinces in this area. I don't know, and we'll see how that ends up working out. Whether it actually will actively split out the units. I'm not sure I would love that, because it can be very risky to have individual stacks walking around. I do like having my own control over that. Or whether it is like the rebel suppression, where the army stays in one place, but it just captures provinces in the other areas. And that would be quite cool, because carpet sieging is one of the more annoying parts of the game. Can feel satisfying, but it's also quite annoying to do. We can now specify to never mothball certain forts. I don't know why this is an expansion feature. I mean, I like it. Like if you often mothball all your forts and then you want to have some where you say, this one is very important, it's on the border to somebody specific, for example, never mothball this one, or I have rebels here that I want to have under control, something like that. And you can set that fort to not be mothballed. But this really doesn't scream expansion to me. That should be the free patch, honestly. And then there's a draft transports mechanic to quickly build a transportation navy. I don't quite know how that works, but apparently you quickly get transports, which might be quite useful. There have been big changes to how regencies work. You still have your normal consort regency if you have a consort from a royal marriage, but if you don't, then usually you would end up in a regency council so far. And they were quite annoying. These days they are led by estates, and somehow they change based on how the estate's standing is in your country right now. We don't have the details on what exactly those changes are. We'll see, but they will be different. So it's not just a random regency council, but you'll actually get a different regency depending on what kind of a state is in charge. You will still not be able to declare wars though, which is the really bad thing about regencies. So probably good to still avoid them, even if they're a new feature. You can also now extend regencies if you have really bad heir, or if you have low legitimacy on your heir. And then there are a few content additions that are fixed or attached to the DLC itself. There's a new government reform, Mandala, which encourages gameplay with vassals. I don't quite know in what way. There are a bunch of new missions, Brunei, Champa, Iroquois. So we have North American here and Southeast Asian, I suppose. Mostly, if not all of these, yeah. Seem to be one of the two categories. 2 new disasters in the Khmer and Vietnam. I don't know what these are going to be. And we've already talked about the new achievements. And then there are a few cosmetic changes that you only get with the expansion itself. Unit models, as always. War canoe models. We'll get to war canoes in a minute. And, well, achievement icons, I suppose. I do like that these are no longer separate packs that are sold but are part of the expansion, even though they don't add much to me. It was felt weird to not buy certain expansions or packs because it was just cosmetic. So this is fine to me. Alright, so expansion itself, main things, I don't know if there's a main thing here. These are smaller changes, and they do explain in the dev diary why Leviathan is not like a huge expansion feature-wise. And part of that is because they did a whole slew of bug fixes, which we won't be able to talk about all of them, not even remotely, but I picked out some of them that looked interesting to talk about later. So a couple of nice changes here, nothing huge or life-changing. Then there's the free patch. Let's have a quick look at that. Well, quick look, I say. I think it's a lot longer than the expansion list itself. There's a mechanic for Sikh gurus. There are these reforms for colonial subtypes. We discussed those earlier, so when you have different types of colonial nations, they can have different reforms. There's apparently a new government reform based on plutocracy. No idea what that's going to do. And these are the war canoes. Primitives can now build transports. Now there's that early transport ship, the war canoe, that you can use before Tech 3. They're going to be pretty cruddy at fighting, but I don't think they have any specific limitations considering transport range or anything. So you might be able to do some weird stuff with primitives and their transports. Looking forward to seeing really weird early migrations. That'd be funny. Or invasions even. Get those Aztecs into Europe. Probably not on Tech 3 because of colonial range and all that, but that would be funny. Then there's a whole slew of changes for Native American tribes and their migration. So migration has been changed. I don't really know in what way. It was really weird early on. You were only able to migrate if you were an OPM, so one province minor tribe, and you could move from one province to another and gain some bonuses for it. But it was weird and really odd gameplay, and you got out of it really fast. I do hope that they changed this for the better. The speed of migration was removed. I assume that's because of the way that the new migration mechanic works, and the cost was added instead. Okay, there's an alert for when you can migrate when a tribe's province devastation gets high. So I suppose the idea is that if you stay too long in one place, you exhaust all the natural resources and you'd better migrate. That makes sense. New mechanics for tribal government, new mechanics for federations, government reforms for tribal nations, and Kongsi Federation government reform, which I assume is a special government reform for a specific federation? Maybe. We'll have to see how that plays out in the game. I do like that whole area is going to get reworked, and that it even gets reworked outside of the expansion. It's pretty cool, right? We saw in the expansion itself, there's totemism in there, but the whole actual tribe mechanics is part of the free patch. Next up in the free features is changes to content. I summed them up under that header, and it's a lot. They're not huge necessarily. A bunch of new events for special regions, for example, flavor events for the new tribes or the focused tribes, that we have new Zoroastrian holy sites. We talked about this. Zoroastrian is a bit more fleshed out as a religion now, with a separate province that is Zoroastrian at the start of the game, with special events according to that, and a holy site mechanic akin to that of the Coptics. New idea groups, always nice to see that. New tech group, more ideas. 98 new provinces in North America. That's a lot. I mean, I'm not going to claim that I knew the North American geography by heart, but it's going to look quite changed. They've been doing this to other regions already of the world, and now it's North America's time. So that's going to be, I mean, at least neat. And I hope that removed a lot of these ginormous provinces, and must have, that we used to have in North America, which made walking around it a bit weird. Generic missions for North American natives and Polynesians, so if you don't have special missions, you still have specific generic missions rather than the utterly generic tree that we had before. A bunch of new events for Polynesian tags, and several events for Native Americans. New Parsi culture that's related to the Zoroastrians, I believe. New trade code cloves. Japanese volunteer mechanics? I don't know what this is. That sounds interesting, but no, it's just additional mercenaries, which I'm not really sure why this is part. I mean, I guess it adds flavor, but the whole separate mercenary company thing had never really made tons of sense to me. It doesn't feel like there's a huge difference between hiring one mercenary company or the other, but hey, maybe it's somebody else's cup of tea. Several events for Federation, sure, one volcano event, and some straits between islands. Now, I don't know which islands these are. It's probably Polynesian stuff, but that can change some gameplay when you can suddenly cross in places where you used to need boats. So, maybe. It's always good to get content change, especially idea groups and missions. I think they make playing in different areas of the game, well, different and interesting. And that's very, very important for a game like EU, which you want to play again and again and again and again. So I like that they continue doing that, even though it might sometimes seem a bit small, but it is important. Quality of life changes. New alert types. No idea what this is about, but I mean, I'm sure it's alerts up in the, well, top left / middle of the screen, where you get the little alert drop downs. I assume there are more of those now, which is probably good, because some things really didn't have alerts, which seemed odd, and then other things had alerts which were never really needed. Air legitimacy has been reworked. It, I believe, grows faster now. You can extend that regency if you have one, and your regency, while you have a regency, your legitimacy doesn't go down, if I'm not mistaken. Here's one, I picked this out from the bug fixes, but I think it's actually very interesting. Added difference between the graphics for co-belligerent with allies and co-belligerent without allies in the declare war interface. That's really important. So usually if you make somebody co-belligerent, they can call their allies when you declare war. But sometimes that's not the case, and it was super opaque, at least to me, as to when which was the case. Now there are different graphics for that, and that makes a ton of sense. Make easier to find the province with revolt risk and stability in the expansion tab. Sounds good. No idea how they changed that, but generally it's always a bit annoying to find out which province actually generates revolt risk. There's a tooltip for it, and then you have to search for the province. I assume this gives you a button to just jump to it or something. This one. I mean, it's a tiny change, but it's been annoying me so much. It says only provinces can be selected on map in P-style view. Now, somewhat weird English aside, the idea is, well, the thing that used to happen is I was in a P-style view, I click on provinces to take, and then I accidentally click on, what was it? Might have been units, might have been like centers of trade or something. And then you suddenly jump out of the PC view and end up somewhere completely different. Now that can no longer happen. I believe there are other views in which this can happen. Forget which ones. But if they are, it would have been nice if they had fixed that too. But at least they fixed this one. So that's one annoyance gone. I do like when annoyances are gone. And when there's there's an alert you always have, or at least I tend to always have if I have a larger empire, is the trade company investment one that just says, hey, you could spend money on some trade company investment. There's always some trade company investment you can do if you're a bit bigger. And clicking that thing actually didn't do anything. You just got a tooltip when hovering it, but almost useless tooltip. Now this opens the macro builder and the right tab, which just makes a lot of sense. Not that that's a reason to, but it means a good change, right? So let's talk about it. And then a bunch more cosmetic stuff we don't need to go into detail. At least I don't super care. More flags, custom names, government reform icons. That's all. I mean, it's nice and necessary, but it doesn't change the game for me. And then there's what they summarized as game balance changes, which are not really features and therefore don't fit into the previous two categories. They are, as far as I know, all part of the free patch and not of the expansion. I grouped them up here in major and minor. That's just my own opinion. I just took some that looked like they were important and put them into major. The rest went down into minor or got deleted because they really didn't seem relevant at all for today. Here's one that at first I overlooked because I've never used this feature, but it's actually a huge change. So there's an estate privilege that you can grant that, as of right now, grants 100% extra manpower if the estate has full influence, while reducing the tax you collect by 25%. You're essentially just paying money for manpower, and the more influential your estate is, the more manpower you get, but the more money you also pay. This has been changed ginormously. Instead of 100% manpower at maximum, you now get 25% at maximum. You do pay less taxes for it, but the ratio between taxes and manpower has been, well, it's a lot worse now, right? You used to pay 25 for 100, so a quarter, and now you're paying 10 for 2.5 or for 25. With the old ratio, you would have expected 40% gain for 10% tax. So that's a huge nerf. And also, somewhat moves the thing into irrelevance, at least reduced relevance, because you're never going to be at 100% influence, or you really don't want to be at 100% influence. So you're not going to get that 25% manpower. You're going to get even less. And then the modifier is not super interesting anymore. It might still be worth it, but So this must have been a lot better than I thought it was. And people must have used this in some way that they didn't like. Huge nerf. Admittedly to something I never use. And then admirals and explorers now use diplomatic power for a separate maintenance pool. It used to be that while you bought generals with military power and admirals and explorers with diplo power, they all would cost extra mil once you went over the general limit. It was a bit weird. And I always ended up firing my admirals because generals were more relevant, really, and didn't really want to pay mil power for admirals. Now they have a separate maintenance pool. It doesn't say whether that means that the normal pool of generals is going to get reduced, or whether we sort of get some extra freebie admirals to use. But either way, it makes a lot more sense. It makes sense to use dip for those rather than mil. Everything else aside. And now these are still major changes we're going to talk about here. I just grouped them into categories. There are a couple of changes to regencies. We already touched on those. The claim grade, so whether you have a weak and average or a strong claim, increases faster over time. So you can actually have a weak heir grow up into a average or maybe even strong heir over time. And somehow only kids get reduced claim strength. I don't quite know what they're trying to say here. It might mean that as soon as they're 16, they will get full-on claim strength, that might be what they're trying to say. So that only if you have a minor ascent to the throne, you have claim strength issues. But you never have a minor ascent to the throne, so that can't be it. Not 100% sure what this means. We talked about this. Regencies always have a minimum 80% legitimacy, so you can keep on using them until your heir is ready. So you really can do the thing where you extend your regency once or twice so your heir doesn't come into play with too low legitimacy. While you have a regency constant, you no longer have reduced legitimacy, but instead you have increased stab cost, which seems fine. It goes hand in hand with the whole keeping your regency a bit longer thing. Then there's naval combat changes. A huge one to me is that combat width, or naval engagement width, increases with tech, going from 5 to 75 over time. So in current EU4, it is 30 always. Well, there are modifiers, but base naval engagement width is always 30. So late game you have large fleets meeting and most of the ships don't get to fight in the beginning. And early on, well, every ship can fight. So the larger navy always wins early on, until you fill the width. Well, I say always, but you know what I mean. This is probably a pretty big change. It might lead to less doom stacking early on. So in naval combat, it mostly was the right way. If you want to actually go into naval combat, you just send all your ships. And maybe now you can actually have smaller navies with the smaller engagement width, because additional boats won't be as useful. It's possible, we'll have to see, but that would be very nice, because I don't like doom stacking. I don't like the fact that you have one big navy that just crushes things. And they worked on fixing that in Hearts of Iron, so I don't know why they wouldn't try to fix it in EU4 as well. I wonder, because I didn't see anything about that in the patch notes, whether they touched on the modifiers to engagement width, because the flagship modifier that gives +3 engagement width, which I think is very strong, it gets a lot worse when 75 is your maximum. Adding +3 to 75 is a lot worse than adding 8 to 5, right? So it should really be percentage based or go up with tech as well or something. And I don't see in these notes that they recognize that, but maybe we'll see a fix later on for that if they missed it. Coastal Sea now reduces naval engagement width by 20% instead of increasing it by 10%. I wasn't even aware that you had more engagement width in Coastal Sea, but I mean, this is a relatively huge change. Not that I really, well, since I didn't know it existed, I'm not quite sure what kind of effect it had. I don't know if you're going to start choosing your engagements based on whether it's coastal or not now. Inland sea or not, sure, but coastal, I mean, maybe. Maybe the idea is that you have an easier time defending against larger naval attackers, because you can sortie from your port with a smaller navy and still be okay. Maybe. Yeah, I don't know why they do this. Movement speed of ships now increase with more advanced models. Galleys up to 25% at best model, while others get +50%. So ships get faster over time with technology. Oh, I don't like this. I don't like this at all. The reason is that upgrading ships really isn't a thing I do. It costs the same to upgrade a ship that it does to build a new ship, minus the sailors, but same money. So what I usually do, I just use my old boats until they die, and if they die, then I'm gonna build a new one of the new better class. But now you have, I assume the speed of a fleet is the speed of the slowest ship in it. So this really asks you to have only your most modern ship types in a navy, so you can go at full speed. And that just seems like a lot of busy work, right? And then you capture somebody's boat and that boat is not of the highest standard and you don't notice, and suddenly your whole navy is slower because of it. I mean, it's somewhat realistic. I'm not saying it's not realistic. It's just, ugh. Seems like work. And unnecessary work. I don't know. If they do this, I would like to see a change to how you upgrade ships and how much it costs to upgrade ships. To make it actually good and interesting to do, rather than currently I'm paying the same price than what I'm paying for a new ship. What's the point? Anyway, enough whining. Let's talk about innovativeness. I've whined a lot, I do math a lot in my Let's Play videos on whether grabbing innovativeness is worth it. And I tend to end up at the result that no. When there are decisions that give you innovativeness, often I feel like it's not worth it. And when it's about taking tech ahead of time, I always often feel like it's not worth it. So they changed a bunch of those things. They didn't change innovativeness itself, but the ways you get it. So the window to take tech or ideas for innovativeness has been increased to a year from 90 days. So the person who first takes an idea or a tech gets, I think, +2, is it, innovativeness? And everybody else gets 90 days, as it stands right now, to catch up. So if you take the idea and or tech within those 90 days, you also get the bonus. They increase that window to a full year. That just gives you more time. And it guarantees that you have an extra year pass in the time, right? Because it's a full year. So you're actually going to be 10% closer to a reduced ahead of time penalty, if that makes sense. Because every year that you're ahead of time on technology, when you take it, you pay 10% extra cost for the technology. So this actually allows you to wait for a year for 10% price reduction before you take it. So it essentially makes it cheaper to get innovativeness that way. Passive gain from being ahead of time in technology just is doubled. And so is the amount you get for taking ideas and techs early. Oh, there we see it. It used to be 1 for ideas and 2 for techs, and now it's 2 and 4. So they just made it a lot easier to take innovativeness. It doesn't say that they changed any events regarding that, so that makes the value of those events comparatively lower. A few AI changes here I picked out. Were a lot more, but the ones I cared for is that the budgeting has been improved, and you might have seen that in the latest expansions. The AI has been a debt a lot. They've not been very good at keeping money around, so that has apparently been improved. And they were made better at understanding, gauging when to build a coastal defense building. I would say there's a very easy rule for this. If you want to build a coastal defense building, don't. But aside from that, I mean, I assume this means that they're going to build less coastal defense, and that seems good. They did change, and we see that in this off-note section here, that they made coastal defense buildings a bit more useful because you can use them now to block slave raids. So when the Barbary pirates come around and try to take your slaves and devastate your country, you can block that with coastal defense and naval batteries. It doesn't quite say how. What kind of range does it have? Is it only blocking the province it's in? Is it blocking the whole sea zone? How does it work? I don't know. Will I build coastal defense or naval batteries in order to do that? Probably not. No. I mean, it only matters if you're playing near pirates anyway. But even then, it doesn't feel like it's ever going to be worth it. But who knows? It's possible. I mean, obviously taking buildings that are underutilized because they're pretty bad and making them better seems like a good idea. Severely lowered reformation desire gain. Now this one was interesting to me because reform desire is what triggers the reformation. And if that is lowered, the gain, then that would mean to me that the reformation triggers later, I assume. And then the Age of Reformation starts later and everything just gets muddled up, which is weird. But maybe I'm missing something there, some interaction. Quite possible. And Christian countries can join the HRE by simply bordering it. I mean, it does say can join. So I assume that's if you are, as a player, a Christian, you can just click join rather than having the Emperor that jazz. I don't know if it actually makes any changes to how the AI joins the HRE, because with the Emperor patch there was, Emperor Expansion when it first came out, essentially everybody joined the HRE and it was very, very weird in Europe. And obviously Europe is all Christians, so if this actually changes AI behavior and makes them join, well, why don't you just have a huge HRE at the start of the game? We'll see. I'm going to assume that this is mostly an option for players. So there's been a whole slew of minor changes to game balance. I am not going to go through all of them, not even to all the ones I've listed here, but a few of them, especially the categories, should be worth talking about. There have been a few changes to sailors, and I'm on record as being somewhat indifferent about sailors. It feels like you usually don't care about them, but that has actually changed a bit over time in the last few expansions, and now I do find myself at points where I want more sailors a few times. I even built some docks in our Genoa campaign just to get more sailors to be able to support more trade boats running around. And we do get more sailors now. Each coastal development gives 40 now instead of 30, which is a 30% increase, 33% increase. It's pretty good. But ships now also need more sailors as they become more advanced. Once again, I don't know how much I'm a fan of the whole things are different on ships when they become more advanced. Because now, do you just want to stay on the old ships because they have the same trade power, but use less sailors, fewer sailors? Do I have to actively try to have low-tech ships in my trade fleets just for sailor efficiency? I hope not. And then a whole bunch of galleys got their sailor numbers reduced. I believe the Archipelago frigate is also a galley. Not quite sure. Might be trade boat. But all the others here are galleys. Marines, another underutilized thing, have been buffed. I don't think I've ever used Marines yet. They were introduced with Emperor and kinda not that great. They're obviously meant for landing from ships, attacking from ships and all that, but the extra shock damage they took was just a huge nerf. So now it's only 10% extra shock damage instead of 25, and the finish of naval ideas, another pretty useless thing, is now 10% extra Marines instead of 5%. I don't know, let me know if you've ever used Marines, if they have been any good. I've not even felt the need to do so. But maybe there's some sort of game where that matters. Other things that seem somewhat noteworthy, the upgrading of sense of trade is now depends on the development in the province. So you need 15 development for rank 2 and 30 development for rank 3, which would have prevented me from spamming a lot of set of trades in my Genoa campaign. So if you're really rich but you don't have a million monarch points, it might be a lot harder to get those good centers of trade going. You don't get any power protection anymore for supporting rebels in a rival country. I didn't know that was a thing. And usually once you have support rebels, at least I don't super care about power protection anymore. But if I had known this was a thing, I might have considered doing it. But now I don't need to care. Canals are now somewhat useful. They didn't really do much at all before in the game, and now they give a lot of trade power. And then there are smaller changes here, no aristocratic ideas on hordes, and all sorts of smaller things. Yes, if you co-belligerent a nation that you are royally married to, you get a penalty for it, as you should, and so on and so forth. Let's go into bug fixes. And I've limited these to, what's this? I don't know, 15, 20, and there's a huge list in the original patch notes. Like, I think Johan said something like 1,000 bugs were fixed. That's a lot. Now, some of them were bugs that were clearly related to the new features. So I don't know if I would consider it a bug fix if it wasn't in a live version of the game. But still, there were a lot of fixes, but most of them were good, sure. Fix this crash to desktop, change that text, or fix that typo somewhere. Good, cool, make the game better, I like it. But not something I really want to talk about. So these are the ones I thought were worth talking about. So apparently there was something wrong with the way vassals use trade companies. I assume they just didn't, and now they can. So that was fixed. Tributary states with vassals can now give land to their vassals in a peace deal. That's just, I mean, why wouldn't they be able to? It was always a bit weird how the whole tributary and vassal systems interacted, and it seems like they fixed a lot of those interactions. This is actually relevant. Something I've done in the past, but I hated to do, is that when a fort was retaking a province you conquered, and that's right, if the enemy has a fort and you take a province next to it, and then you leave that province, then the fort will, within a tick or so, retake that province. Now, you could avoid that by swapping the occupation to a subject and then swapping it back. And that's no longer possible, so a tiny bit of an exploit removed here. This is huge. Fixed estimated arrival date does not match real one when moving army. I've been complaining about this a lot. You have a tooltip that tells you when the army arrives, and it lies. It always lies. And apparently it doesn't lie anymore, if I'm to believe this bug fix. So that would be cool. There was an issue with colonists not converting colonies to their religion. Fixed armies ignore forts if the path has been set before the war declaration. So this is, I talk about forts and how I feel like the AI has a little bit too much of an ability to just walk across my forts. And often, sure, it's probably my misunderstanding of fort mechanics, but I knew this was one bug that was in the game, has been in the game for a long time. If an army has a path set before you declare war, because you have, say, military access, and then you declare war, and now you would not be able to move through there anymore, because there's a fort in the way, the army would still just move through it, because the pathing has already been done. And that has been fixed. And then there's a note that I mostly left in because it was funny to read. Fix the really annoying adding cash to war score doesn't let you add the full amount when nearing max war score bug. First of all, I mean, sure, it's annoying that the add max money button doesn't always work the way it does. But to call it a really annoying bug in your patch notes and then have a description text there that doesn't really... It's extremely hard to understand what it's actually trying to say. It's funny, and it's a bit of a symptom of these patch notes. They feel a lot like they're just commit messages from programmers. So they close a bug and then they put a message in there, and there wasn't really any editing of these notes before they went out. But hey, it's funny. There was a way to prolong battles by lowering morale, because the morale damage would then be reduced that you do. People would stay in longer, so you can probably generate more casualties. I've never done this. Seems exploity, and they fixed it. Good. Fixed it, yes. Another one with the movement thing. That's very, very good. Fixed bug where attached unit could be one day off. We've seen this. We have mercenaries attached to our main army, which is small. We move in, our small army arrives a day early, gets stack wiped because they're very small, and then the mercenaries arrive alone, and maybe without a general, or at least a good one. And that has been annoying in the past, and it's good it's fixed. Another one that's been in the game forever is that when you hunt for the 7 cities within a conquistador, they would just stop. Just, yeah, you know, I'd rather just sit here in this nowhere province than do my job. And I'm not going to tell you about it either. I think this happened when they tried to move into province, that when it was explored, they realized they didn't have military access to. And then they would just stay there. But apparently this was fixed. So that's good. Especially if we do more colonial gaming, which with the new colonial system we probably will. Fix the game claiming that your movement is blocked by a hostile fort when trying to retreat from battle before 12 days have passed. This is really just a change to the way it's displayed in the game. So you still can't leave a battle before 12 days have passed. That's not going to claim that it's because of a fort, which makes sense. Fix some tooltips. I just picked one here, Pure Authority tooltip. I always hate when tooltips lie to me, and this is changed, that's great. This next change I don't get. Right-clicking on a province in development macro builder no longer centers map on the province. So I've had the issue for a long time that not all the menus in the game that show provinces work the same way, and some allow you to jump to a province and some don't. I like the jumping to a province to see where it actually is. Why would they remove it from the development macro builder rather than adding it to all the other screens? I don't know. Not a clue. It does now, in fact, reduce our allies' trust when we give away their provinces in a peace deal. That's good. I've done that once, I think, in an early campaign where we lost the coalition war and I just gave my allies stuff away rather than mine. At least they trust you less for it. That seems to make a lot of sense. Native countries can no longer charter trade companies. Sure, makes sense. And finally, a bit anticlimactically, no revoking ewiger Landfriede, which is the imperial law that forbids internal HRE wars, actually allows wars again. Makes a lot of sense. So overall, interesting but not hugely impactful expansion features. So I'm sure you could just not get Emperor. It's not going to impact your game too much. A decent amount of free feature changes, which is always nice, and I don't see any reason you wouldn't get the new patch. And then a good set, I think a good direction of game balance changes here, and a whole giant set of bug fixes. And all these things are totally worth it. I mean, all the free things are very much worth it, and I'm happy they're there. And I always think that you should think of these expansions as a package deal. I know there's part that's free and part that you have to pay for, and I understand if you don't pay for the part, but the reason that we're getting these pretty huge patches is that they sell these expansions with it. And I always have a bit of I don't really see the idea behind, well, I don't need this expansion because it doesn't add so much, because there's so much good stuff in the free features. It's true, sure, from a monetary perspective, but overall, you wouldn't be getting the free patches if people wouldn't be buying the expansions. So, I mean, if you can afford it and you want to play some EU, go buy the expansion. If you don't like it, then don't play EU. I mean, if you can't afford it, sure, take the free patch, play with it. I'm not saying you're bad for not buying it at all. I'm just saying that it helps me justify the relatively low amount of stuff that I get for the expansion with the huge amount of stuff we're getting for free. That makes the expansion better for me. And that makes this whole thing it looks like a good package deal. We're gonna have to see how it plays. We're gonna see how much it actually changes the game. That's the one thing I have. It's not like the huge HRE changes that we got with Emperor or anything. It's a lot of smaller changes that make the game probably better. But I'm not just seeing that there's a huge change that makes campaigns vastly different. Which makes my choice of achievement actually, I still haven't decided. It's 2 days before Leviathan comes out. And I still don't know which achievement I'm going to do next. But there will be one. I will record a video on the 27th. And it should go up if everything works out on the 28th at noon. Well, maybe even at midnight, because I still have my Genoa campaign going on for a while. Anyway, thank you folks so much for watching. Let me know what you think about the expansion, about the patch, and maybe what you're gonna be most interested in playing once it comes out. Also, let me know if you think that it's just not worth it. Thank you folks for watching. If you're new to my channel, there's a whole bunch of content on here, mostly let's play of EU4 achievement runs. Sometimes custom achievements, mostly difficult actual achievements in EU4. Long let's plays, long lists. Go watch them, they're great. Thank you for watching, see you folks next time.